What is going on, everyone? I'm back, and I'm here coming at you Tuesday, several hours before the end of the NFL trade deadline. And the reason for that is because in this last 24 hours, we have had a number of different trades. So what I wanted to do is take a quick look at each trade, how it affects the teams, and most importantly, how it affects fantasy outlooks moving forward. So let's get right into it. So starting with the big trade of last night, we have Jimmy Garoppolo being sent to the 49ers for a second round draft pick. And what this basically means for the Patriots is business as usual, because unless Tom Brady gets hurt, nothing is going to change. And obviously that's something we can't predict. But as far as value that they got in return of Garoppolo, I would say that this is probably the most they could get right now. They knew that once he became a free agent, they didn't want to pay the amount of money that Garoppolo would want, probably around 50-60 million guaranteed, and they just weren't willing to give that money for someone that only had several games under his belt. And to me, probably could have gotten more if they had traded him earlier on in the season before the season began, but this is just kind of capitalizing what they could get for Garoppolo instead of not getting anything from him back. Fantasy-wise, this won't really affect the Patriots. As far as the 49ers are concerned, now Garoppolo goes to a team that's obviously in rebuild mode. They're young all over, offense, defense, whatever it may be. That offensive line has some issues. Playmakers outside of Carlos Hyde and Pierre Garçon are hard to find. And I would say now Jimmy Garoppolo is obviously going to be the starting quarterback for the 49ers. Brian Hoyer got released. He'll probably be signed by the Patriots, actually, funny enough. But with Garoppolo being the starting guy there, he is worth adding. Speculative add, with these injuries that have happened at quarterback, with a lot of quarterbacks on bye weeks. He is worth picking up this week, I would say. And I'll address this in later videos, specifically for the waiver wire video every week that comes out. But I'm going to hold off a little bit on that video since we might get even more breaking trade news as Tuesday keeps going on. So I would say go ahead, put in a waiver request on Garoppolo for a quarterback needy team. Now, his potential is going to obviously be limited as to what he can do on that rebuild team. He doesn't have as many weapons around him as he did in New England, so temper expectations. I would say he's probably a 15 to 16 point quarterback per week, something like that. As far as guys' benefits on the offense, Carlos Hyde, I don't think it'll benefit him that much. Maybe a little bit, but the guy that I'm looking at mostly is Pierre Garçon. I think that he will be the guy that benefits from this the most. I'm assuming Garoppolo goes in and starts. To me, he's the best quarterback on that roster at the moment. He's mobile. He's seen how things are done at a great organization with the Patriots. He's had some experience with him, and it's been good experience. Even though it's been limited, I think he can go out there. It can provide a little bit of a spark. I look for Pierre Garçon since he is the best available receiver on that offense, without question, to get the immediate impact. Same with the other guys that are on the roster, other wide receivers, some of the tight ends. But I look at Pierre Garçon to be the main beneficiary. I don't think this makes him, a wide receiver one or a must start or anything like that by any means. But I would say probably a more confident flex play. Maybe best case scenario, a low end wide receiver too. Now moving on to the big trade this morning, that is Ajayi moving from Miami to Philly in exchange for a 4th round draft pick. And there's a lot to analyze here, going from the Dolphins, the value they got, to what it means for their backfield, and all the way to what this means for the Philadelphia backfield, and obviously fantasy impact as well. So I'll start with Ajayi, the man himself, and the situation there in Philadelphia now, how this impacts the backfield, fantasy-wise, everything. So let's get into that. For me, the big question is that a lot of people are going to be asking, is this a bad move or a good move for Ajayi and for fantasy owners of him? So I would say, obviously, Miami right now even though their record is somewhat decent, I don't think they're as good as their record indicates. And Ajayi wasn't getting the usage that he demanded. And a lot of times when the Dolphins were going down, they would abandon the run if they were trailing by a lot. So in terms of that, I think Ajayi is finding himself in a much better situation. He's going to a team that has the best record in the NFL, that has a better quarterback situation, much better, that has more weapons established there, that has a much better offensive line. So all those things are going to greatly benefit Jay Ajayi. Now the question comes with volume, because in Miami he was the unquestioned guy. He was getting pretty much every carry in the run game. But now he joins a backfield that includes Wendell Smallwood and LeGarrette Blount. If I had to guess right now, I would say one of those guys probably sees a big percentage of their carries decrease, maybe even is cut. We'll have to wait and see for that though. But I would say, Ajayi being acquired by the Eagles has to mean that he is now the running back one over there. He won't probably get as many carries as he did with the Dolphins. I also think that the Eagles are more of a pass-first team, so also factoring that into the situation. But as far as those three guys, just treating it as a three-man backfield right now, I would have to say Ajayi is the number one guy as of right now. He will get the majority of carries, but as far as the situation itself goes, I think this means probably a done deal for either Smallwood or Blount in fantasy realms, because one of those guys, if not both, can become pretty much fantasy irrelevant. To me, probably more so Blount, because Ajayi is so similar to Blount in as far as his playing style and the type of player he is. Kind of put your head down and just go forward and grind out those tough yards. Blount wasn't being as effective as the Eagles would have anticipated, nowhere near close to what he was for the Patriots as to what he's done for the Eagles this year. Not as efficient, so they're rolling the dice on Ajayi. They've got nothing to lose. They're making a push for the playoffs and for the Super Bowl, so that's the reason Ajayi is coming in. Now, I would say for all those teams that sold high on Ajayi, sold low on Ajayi, and some might have even dropped Ajayi on the waivers, there's going to be a panic now for Ajayi and the value that he can bring, because again, new team, new potential, kind of that unknown, what he can bring. And I would say right now he's back in the mix for a high-end running back 2. I'm going to hold off on saying he's back in the mix for running back 1 as far as fantasy rankings are concerned, because just the situation in Philly, I think he will get less volume. He will take a backseat to the Philly pass game first. They will give him usage because they obviously gave up a 4th round draft pick for him. But to me, I think it's a situation where if you have Ajayi now, it's a possibility of a breath of fresh air. So kind of be happy about that situation. Better situation than he was in Miami. But we have to kind of wait and see. Obviously, he's going to have one more bye week now, which, it is what it is. But the situation, I think, is a better one. So if you're an Ajayi owner, be happy. This is a good move for him. And for all of you that, had Blount or Smallwood, I would say you were probably using them as a flex or running back 2 if you were really desperate. So this obviously doesn't help any of those guys. If you can, make a move for Ajayi as a speculative ad and see what happens. Now, looping back to the Dolphins and how this trade impacts them, I would say it gets really interesting here, because obviously the Dolphins are not as good of a football team, in my opinion, as the record indicates. I mentioned that. Without Jay Cutler, we saw what they did. They got spanked by the Ravens, and obviously that was a bad mismatch. We'll see what happens going forward, but to me, now this turns the attention to Kenyan Drake and Damian Williams in that backfield. So breaking this down, I think it's hard to say which one of these guys, without a doubt, is going to be the guy to go with. Kind of similar to Latavius Murray, Jerick McKinnon when Dalvin Cook went down. I will say this, if I had to pick a guy, PPR-wise, I would say Damian Williams. he's more involved in the pass game, and I would give him a slight edge PPR-wise. Carry-wise, he also holds a very slight lead over Drake. I think it's about 6 or 7 carries, something like that. So PPR-wise, I would give Damian Williams the edge. Probably also when the Dolphins are down, Damian Williams becomes more of a factor, because if he is involved more in the pass game, that means he is going to have more opportunities to score more points, more fantasy touches, so that is a benefit for him. On the flip side, Kenyan Drake. I would say take a gamble on Drake in standard leagues. Obviously, the Dolphins drafted him, I believe it's a year ago now, 3rd round, so not too far ago. They invested a decent pick in him, and to me, Drake is the guy that has the bigger potential as to being that boom guy, being that guy that if he settles into the backfield and he becomes the #1 guy, then he is the guy that long-term should be owned. So a lot of kind of risk and reward here with which guy you want to pick up. Do you want to be safe and kind of pick up Damian Williams, who might be the option for a couple of weeks until Drake unseats him? Or do you want to roll the dice on Drake and kind of invest in a guy right now and say, he's going to break out and he's going to be a running back 2 kind of guy fantasy-wise, and he can fill in a hole for a running back needy team? If it were me, I'm a PPR guy, so I would roll with Damian Williams, but for those of you in standard leagues that are in a tough spot, I would say go ahead, take a shot on Kenyan Drake, but temper the expectations, because similar to Ajayi, skill set wise, I don't think any of these guys are probably as good as Ajayi, so there's only so much we can expect from them. And to me, the Dolphins are still right now not as good offensively as we might think. To me, again, if this team goes down, they're going to turn to the pass game, abandon the run. So keep that in mind. If I had to rank these guys right now, for the time being, Damian Williams, slight edge, just because of the PPR situation, and then Kenyan Drake has that boom potential going forward. So as far as the trade deadline is concerned, these have been the main moves so far, and if there are any other ones this Tuesday, I'll make sure to give out my take on them as well and put out a video in inclusion of this one as well. But for now, these are my takes on the names that have been dealt so far, fantasy impact, and otherwise. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my takes on this? Do you have any questions on the matter? Let me know. And as always, hit me up, comment section, like, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in future videos.